Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbidi Bobbidi Books. My name is Ellie and today I'm going to be reviewing Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson. So this is a book that has been sitting on my shelves for a while and I have been so intimidated to pick this one up. I think because I've heard a lot of people saying that this is very confusing and very complex. So I'd been putting off reaching for it because I was just worried that it would be too much. But then my lovely friend Nikhil over at Esteem decided to do a read-along of the Malazan series. So I thought now would be a good time to jump in because I'll have, a community of people to discuss these books with and to help me along on my Malazan journey, and I'm so glad that I did. I don't think this is as intimidating as people make it out to be, and I did generally have a really positive experience reading this first book. Not to say that there weren't things that I didn't love so much, but we'll get into that in a minute. So yes, first off, this is a book in an epic fantasy series. I think it's a 10-book long series, and there's also sort of side books and side series that all feed into this Malazan world, but the main series is 10 books long, so I'm in for the long haul with this fantasy series. And I am just going to briefly talk about the synopsis for this first book. So I do want to say that if you are a person who likes to know absolutely nothing before they go into a story, then you might want to skip ahead past this little bit. I'll put a timestamp down below. But yes, just very briefly, and I'll try and be non-spoilery, the outline of this story and this series really is that we are following the Malazan Empire as they are expanding their territory. So it's set during a time of conquest and war. And very early on, I think it's in the prologue, we find out that the Emperor is missing, presumed dead, and that his master of assassins, a lady called Surly, is now in charge, and she actually changes her name from Surly to Lasine, which means throne master in her language, so it's all a little bit sus. And then there's a little bit of a time jump, and in the first chapter we are thrown straight into the action during this siege of a city called Pale. So the Malazan Empire, the Malazan army, is trying to take over this city, and it's an epic battle. You've got mages firing spells everywhere. You've got this floating moon city that's hovering above Pale and is like firing down on the army below, and it's all very epic. And there are a lot of casualties, including a lot of bridge burners who are the old emperor's elite force, so his most trusted and most skilled fighters, and a lot of them unfortunately were lost during this battle. And so there is this undercurrent throughout this book of distrust with members of the Malazan army not necessarily knowing whether they are being well treated by the new empress, and yeah, there's a lot of sort of uneasiness, you could say, within the Malazan army. And then from there we move to the next target, which is this city called Dirigistan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'll put it on the screen for you so you can see the spelling. But that is where the majority of this book takes place. And we're following people on either side of the conflict. So we're following members of the Malazan army who are planning their siege of the city of Dirigistan. But then we're also following people who live in the city, and the people who are trying to maintain control and to resist the Malazan forces. So we get both points of view. We're following both sides of the conflict, and it's not necessarily clear which is the good side, and that's something that I really enjoy about this story. There's no obvious baddie, there's no obvious goodie, you've just got people on both sides, and so it's just really interesting, and it reads more real because of that, because in real life, it's not clear cut who the good people are, who the goodies are. Everybody is just trying to do their best and trying to do the right thing. And so yeah, I really enjoy sort of the greyness within this book. There are also a lot of fantasy races within this series. For example, you have the Tisti Andi, who to me read kind of like dark elves, and you've also got the Barghest, I think they're called, who are people who are larger than humans. They're kind of like giants, I guess, kind of like barbarians. And there's more as well, but I don't want to say too much because I think part of the fun is learning about these different sort of fantasy races as you go through. And yeah, it's pretty expansive, this series, I will say that. So firstly, I just want to address the fact that obviously a lot of people have come forward and said that this series is very complicated and very difficult to get into, and I just want to say that I think it's not as bad as people say. There is a lot going on, don't get me wrong. It has an incredibly big scope, and I feel like that can be intimidating to a lot of people. But I think a lot of the difficulty comes from the fact that Stephen Erikson very much just kind of throws you right in and doesn't really give you much exposition, doesn't give you much, you know, about the world building or anything, and you kind of just have to go with it. So I feel like if you're interested in reading this series and you want to pick up the first book, I would say just be okay with not knowing everything, because you don't get all of the context in this first book to fully understand the implications of everything. So you have to be kind of okay with that and to just run with it, because Stephen Erikson will definitely throw out some really wild concepts at you, almost in a kind of off-the-cuff way without giving you any context or any explanation. So you just kind of have to run with it and be okay with that. I do also want to say that the structure of this book is a little bit unusual, and I'm not sure if that's because this was originally written as a screenplay, like it was originally supposed to be a movie, and then it was adapted as a book, and I don't know, that might be part of the reason why it reads quite disjointed, or at least it did for me. So this book does read kind of like a series of individual scenes rather than a flowing narrative. So that's a little bit unusual, and you are jumping around a lot between different people, and there is a huge cast of characters. So there's a lot of people to get your head around, and you're kind of flipping from one to the other, and so that, you know, makes it a little bit challenging to get your head around sort of who's on what side, and to understand the characters on a more intimate level. So if you're someone who usually enjoys things like Robin Hobb and the Farseer series, which I love, by the way, then, you know, this is going to feel very different, because we're not sitting with our main hero. We're not sitting with, you know, one character for a long period of time and getting to know their thoughts and feelings and motivations on a really intimate level. It is much more sort of breadth rather than depth in this series, I would say, at least within this first book. You're introduced to a whole cast of characters, and you kind of aren't given a huge amount to go on with each of the characters. There's not a whole lot of description. I could only really tell you what a handful of the characters actually look like, because I don't think Stephen Erikson really goes into much detail about what each character looks like, and you don't really get to hear their thoughts or kind of be privy to their inner monologue, and so you kind of just have to figure out who they are as a person based on their actions, rather than sort of their thoughts and feelings and the way that they present themselves. So it's very much a case of Stephen Erikson showing and not telling, and that's not my favourite way of getting to know characters in stories. I much prefer stories where you really get to know the character and you're with them, you know, every step of the way, and you get to hear their conflict and their inner dialogue and things like that. So this was very different for me. So that's kind of my main sort of criticism, I would say, if you could call it that, but it's just a stylistic choice. It's just different to what I'm used to, and you know, I'm I'm thinking that this series is only going to get better because I'm assuming that we get to know these characters more and more as we come across them again and again in later books. So yeah, this book definitely feels like a introduction, and I'm sure that we're going to get more detail and get to know more about these characters as we read on, because honestly at the moment I don't feel particularly attached to many of these characters or particularly invested in their stories. My excitement for this series comes much more from the intrigue that is built from not having everything given to us right away. You know, Stephen Erickson has some really cool concepts out there. He kind of throws lots of really interesting ideas at you without giving you much information about them. So he would just sort of, you know, off the cuff tell us about something like, oh, this person was a wax witch, and then not talk about wax witches again for like the whole book. And then, you know, he'll just describe, you know, this piece of magic happening, but we don't really understand the context or what it means or how it all works. And, you know, we're introduced to gods in this series as well. I don't know if I mentioned before, but there are a pantheon of gods in this series, and they all are quite human in their motivations, and they like to meddle in things. So in this first book, the twin gods of chance, Opon, decide to weigh in on the action, and we watch as their sort of involvement swings the balance one way or another during this conflict. And so yeah, so not only do you have, you know, all of these human characters, you also have gods, you also have the different fantasy races, and you've got this magic system that is really unusual and really interesting. And so there's lots of really unique ideas in this story, and that is what makes me excited, and that is what is compelling me to continue on with this series and to carry on reading, because I just want more answers. I want to know what's going on with all of this stuff and how it all works, and you know, it's really unique. I would actually say that the magic in this world, without giving spoilers, almost reads like it has a bit of a sci-fi twist to it as well, which is something that I wasn't expecting in this story. Like, it has a lot of sort of traditional fantasy elements in there, and a lot of military fantasy, obviously, a lot of politics, but then we also have this kind of slightly sci-fi edge to it, which I wasn't expecting. So I'm very excited to see how that all works. And you know, we have this main plot line going forwards of, you know, the Malazan Empire trying to expand their territories and trying to take over these cities. There's also subplots as well that really intrigue me, that involve more of the magic and also more of the history of this world, and I'm so excited to get more information about that. So yeah, this is a very unusual story, or at least I found it to be quite unusual. I think a lot of people might struggle with this. If you like to have, you know, hard explanations for things, if you like a hard magic system, if you feel like you need to have the context right up front to fully appreciate the story, then I feel like you might not necessarily get on with this one. But if you are okay with ambiguity and you are okay with sort of just trusting the process and just, you know, being okay with, you know, the fact that you are invested in a big series, and that hopefully across the 10 books you will start to piece things together and things will all make sense, then I would recommend this book. And I will also say that there are a lot of really useful resources for this book as well. So if you are intimidated by it, you know, there are a lot of guides out there, a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos that really kind of break down this first book and make it more accessible. So for example, there was some guides on Wiki that I used, and I found that really helpful as well. So it was a sort of presentation that someone had kindly put together to sort of break down each scene within this book, and I found that really useful when I came across a scene that I didn't fully understand. You know, then I could reference the guide and it would give me a little bit more info in a more concise way. So I found that really helpful. So yeah, there is a big community out there, and lots of, you know, useful things. So I will put links and things in the description down below if you're interested, because hopefully that will make it an easier journey into the Malazan series for you if you are interested. So yeah, I feel like I had more things to say to you, but I think I've pretty much covered my sort of main thoughts and feelings really about this book. Generally I enjoyed it. I would have liked a little bit more character depth, but I'm hoping that we'll get that more throughout the series as a whole, and I'm just very, very intrigued by it. So yeah, that's my sort of experience of reading this first book. I will say actually that the ending is all quite abrupt, and we are introduced to some new concepts right at the very end of the book without context. So again, if that sounds like something that would annoy you, I just want to say that. So yeah, this is very much kind of like an interesting start. It feels like, we're only scratching the surface with this first book, and there is so much more, and the fact that that is implied in this first book just makes me very, very excited to continue on, because I want to know more about the history, I want to know more about the magic, I want to know more about the politics, I want to know more about these fantasy species, I want to know more about the events that happened at the end of this book that I don't fully understand yet, because I don't have the wider context to fully understand the implications of what actually happened. So yeah, I can definitely tell that this book probably has rereadability, and I can see why people like to go back and return to these books, because I feel like with more context this book will be even more impactful. But yes, I am rambling now, so I'm going to round out this video here. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you found it useful. Please let me know if you've read this book and if you enjoyed it and what your thoughts were. Let me know if you haven't read it, but if you're planning to pick it up and if you want to join it in with Nikhil's read along, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section down below. Also, let me know if you would like to hear a more spoiler-filled discussion about this book as well, because I can film that for you if that would be interesting. So let me know if you'd like to hear that. And yeah, that brings me to the end of this video. Don't forget to like this video if you did like it, subscribe if you want to see some more from me, and I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye!